are back, and we are joined now by Arthur Goldwag, writer, author of The Politics of Fear, The Peculiar Persistence of American Paranoia, as well as many other excellent books looking into this unique brand of right-wing ideology in this wonderful country of ours. Arthur, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Well, thank you for having me.
So we know that there are real conspiracies out there, right? Like you mentioned the church committee in your book. We don't know the full story of how JFK was assassinated, right? But there's a healthy skepticism about power. There's an understanding that sometimes there are conspiracies, but then how does that distort itself for people into something that is not based in reality and is kind of unique to the way that the American right positions itself in U.S. politics?
Well, it's the difference between like a healthy fear that we have instinctively and a paranoia, which is, when the switch gets stuck and you're responding way beyond how you need to. You're in a constant state of agitation. But what I want to say is, I've been looking at this world for a long time. I wrote my first book about cults and conspiracies almost 20 years ago, and I was discovering this strange netherworld, and this is the world we all live in now. I mean, the news has the news media is so it's so hyper partisanized on the one hand, or so bland and middle of the road on the other, that it presents completely different realities to people. And I started out when I wrote The New Hate, my analysis was that, the right wing is pushing these buttons because people will respond to it, but they don't really think this stuff. It's just something they're using. And I'm not so sure of that anymore. I think we live in a country where a lot of people are very angry, very agitated, very confused, and not very bright. And there is a lot of them have risen into politics and policy making now. We're going to have a debate tonight where Trump is going to bring absolutely no substance. He's going to bring absolutely no substance, but he's going to bring feelings. And the feelings are that people are out to get you, people are hurting you, people are laughing at you, people think you're stupid. Well, let me tell you something. I know, and you know, how awful those people are, and we hate them. And it's primal. So we're really just talking about like we're talking about people having this collective temper tantrum that is just may have the worst consequences in the world. We'll soon find out.
Well, you mentioned in terms of the fact that people actually do somewhat believe this stuff, right? I had a conversation with somebody who I would probably identify as like a New York Republican, or I would say more of like a country club conservative. And he was saying to me, Biden is leaving the border open because the Democrats want more voters. And if they come in, the demographics are going to shift in a way where Democrats will benefit from all of these Latino people coming into the country over the border, which is a watered down version of what you describe in your book accurately as an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory, the Great Replacement theory, and has white supremacist origins. And so, but it's a version of it that excludes that part, right, where the Jews are the ones orchestrating these migrants to come over, but it's still downstream from that. And I was just like, wow, I thought you were a little bit more reasonable than this, but apparently this is kind of what even someone in New York, like who is a conservative in that way, has bought in at this point. It's extremely widely disseminated.
Long before there was replacement theory, there was replacement theory. I mean, you look at the reason Americans were so the know-nothings before the Civil War. There was a huge anti-immigration movement, and it evolved from fears of replacement. There's all of these people are coming. They're different. They're not Protestants. They don't speak English. They're willing to work for cheaper. Some of them come from countries that have had revolutions recently. They're scary, and it's easy to turn you against them. The anti-city thing. Trump is, I mean, he's a city guy. He built his reputation in a big city. I won't say he built his fortune in a big city because he mostly lost it here, but he's virulently anti-city. Some of that's because, I mean, right now it's because of the demography of cities. They're full of rich progressives and poor minorities, and those are both groups that this suburban middle America is supposed to be afraid of, even though the suburbs look a lot like that now too. But you go back 150 years, and it was the same kind of thing. The cities were the cauldrons of change. So you turned against the cities. The cities were Democrat run and corrupt, which was almost factually true in some cases. The new minorities were becoming majorities in the cities, and they were establishing political power. It's and I would hesitate to say that these things are anti-Semitic. They are anti-Semitic. Of course, they're anti-Semitic. But the Jews didn't get plugged into these theories until pretty late. I mean, these theories all existed before anyone thought of plugging the Jews into them. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion is mostly cut and pasted from anti-Masonic propaganda. And the anti-Masonic propaganda was a big thing in America. We had an anti-Mason political party in America.
Can you expand on that, Arthur? I wanted to get into the history, and this is a great way to kind of segue into that discussion.
Well, the way I frame it, I'll tell you the two big frames that I have in my book, because it's kind of what's unique about my thinking. Is first that the great organizing hatred in American life is anti-Catholicism. And we haven't had an anti-papist movement in this country for 50 years. It largely did go away when Kennedy got elected. But under the surface, it's still there. People think of a powerful, secretive world power that has all these bizarre rituals and incense and smoke, and they drink wine and they eat people's flesh. Where does that come from? It comes from people's fears. The Protestant immigrant, the original Protestant settlers in this country, fear of Catholicism, which was enormous. England was at war with Catholic powers. There were Catholic powers here. There were the French, and the French were setting up alliances with the Indians. There were the Spanish in the South. So that there was this fear of Catholic subversion. And when the protocols came along at the turn of the 20th century, they plugged the Jews into that. And they made the Jews basically look like the Catholics. But that's one of the big points. The other framing that I have in my book is, I've actually forgotten what I was going to say, so maybe you should ask me another question and come back
sure.
to me.
You mentioned two planks, and it was anti-Catholic modes of thinking that developed into like the anti-Freemason movement, as well as the anti-Semitism and some of these conspiracy theories. But you diving into this history is really interesting, because you also in your book trace the term conspiracy theory back and the origins of it, and then it's not really when it was more popularly disseminated in the mid 20th century. you highlight this New York Times letter as it relates to England and their landowners and this conspiracy about their position on the American Civil War. Can you talk a little bit about that part?
Sure. Well, they were hypocrites. The English ended slavery long before we did, although they kept it in their colonies for as long as they could. English evangelicals, especially, the evangelicals were different 200 years ago than they are now, but the non-Church of England Protestants were especially enthusiastic in their anti-slavery sentiments. The Civil War happens, and England takes the side of the South. They needed the South. They needed the South's goods. They weren't ready to let go. And somebody writes a letter to the New York Times saying, well, obviously England has planned this civil war so that America will fall apart and they'll be able to get us back. And this guy who was a gentleman scholar and he was an Astor, he was a thinker. He wrote a book later on that was anticipated a lot of libertarian thinking. And his attitude was basically that the government should stay out of moral questions and the government should regulate as little as possible and leave people alone. And he, responding to this view of England, he said, this is ridiculous. England has so much else on their mind. You don't need a conspiracy when hypocrisy suffices. But what you've done is you've created a conspiracy theory to explain everything. And this conspiracy theorizing is a thing that people do because the world is big and complicated, unjust, cruel, threatening. And if you can characterize it, if you can personify it, you get a handle on it. You get the benefit of feeling like you have control. You also get the psychological release of having an enemy to hate.
An enemy that's easily identifiable in their eyes, as opposed to, say, forces of power or capital or hypocrisy, as you say, being a complicated stew that results in what we see. It seems to me that at least the hallmark of some of these conspiracies is that we can easily identify a group that explains these tensions, and it also means that it justifies a lot of our pre-existing fears about things in the world.
Yeah, and that brings me back to the second plank that I had forgotten, which is that we have this very complex, dated and strained constitutional system that was designed basically to keep things really, really complicated and millions of redundancies built in to prevent demagogues from being able to seize the machinery of state, and also to keep the church from seizing the machinery of state. And one of the founders had not forgotten that people in search of religious freedom came here and then took other people's religious freedom away. And they wanted to create a system that was much more ecumenical, accepting. They thought that would be good for religion. And it was. And it was a controversial view that has really not been settled. And the reason that people were so afraid of Masons is because Masons are secular, A. They believe in God, but they also believe that anybody can perfect themselves. That if you work hard, if you learn, if you study, if you're contemplative, you will improve yourself. You will reach a kind of perfection, and that's a blasphemy. In the Puritan framework, that's absolute blasphemy. In the Catholic framework, That's absolute blasphemy. And we're divided between those two things. So you have this kind of you have a foundational fear of the Catholic powers, and you have a foundational contradiction between between secularism and diversity, and this democratizing impulse, and the desire to control things and keep things moral and keep things on the right plane and so on. And none of this explains the craziness of Trumpism, but it helps explain a lot of the craziness of the theories that grow up around them.
History often does, right? And when you speak about the conspiracism surrounding Masons, it reminds me of the Red Scare, and you can see how communists were targeted in that way, right? And that conspiratorial thinking that spread throughout the country in the 20th century.
Yeah, there's a quote I used in 3 of my books because it's so great. Samuel Morse's father, Samuel Morse, the portrait painter and the inventor of the telegraph, and also a professional Catholic hater. And his father was a professional fearmonger and conspiracist. And in 1796, his father helped flame this panic that the Illuminati had come to America, this radical left-wing, anti-monarchist, pro-Mason group that wanted to do basically what America was doing, which was establish a secular system. Anyway, Morse gave a speech where he held up a list. He said, "I have in my hand a list of 20 cells of Illuminati in the state of Virginia alone." And it's almost word for word what McCarthy said it to the women of West Virginia in that speech. I have a list. And again, if you want to grab power, if you want to defeat this very complicated system that we have that's designed to prevent a demagogue from seizing power, the way to do it is to get everybody thinking the same thing. And they have to think that they're in trouble and that you're going to save them. And how do you make them think they're in trouble? You tell them who the enemy is. The enemy is not just outside, it's inside. It's your neighbor. You better hate your neighbor. And you better give me a lot of power. And I think that's kind of where we are now. Trump's out for power. He doesn't have ideology. It's a mistake to talk to him about ideology. It's a mistake to talk to him about taxes and so on. Mm-hmm. I don't even know if he's that full of hatred himself, but he's figured out that if you can get everybody thinking the same thing, if you can get them scared and if you can get them dependent on you, this is what a cult leader does too. And Trumpism looks a lot like a cult because it looks a lot like a cult. There's no getting around that.
Right. And, I think you can see that in the way that even Mike Pence, I returned to that profile he did, I think it was in the Atlantic or something, or in the New Yorker a few years ago, where he basically spoke about how in Trump in religious terms, like almost as if, I know he's an imperfect vessel, but this is the person that we follow to get where we need to go. And I know that's a little bit different than his followers because he's making a political calculation. But when you're talking about the American Protestantism and their anxieties and how that plays into this the politics of paranoia, right? I am reminded of just how evangelical thought and almost the mode of thinking is so applicable in the way that they view Trump, and then also in the way that they talk about things like QAnon. Could you speak a bit about that, about how this mode of thinking is such a neat fit for right-wing evangelicals in this country in particular?
Yeah, well, we have again, it's not all evangelicals, and it's largely premillennial dispensationalist evangelicals, people that believe that we're about to enter end times, and that there will be a long lag between when the end times start and the world actually ends, and people go to hell or go to heaven. So they look back at other at biblical analogies, and King Cyrus, or Emperor Cyrus of Persia, does great stuff for Israel. He ends the exile from Jerusalem. It's a wonderful thing. He's not a Jew. He's not one of us, but he helped save us. And the religious evangelicals identify Trump with Cyrus. He's a flawed man, a fallen man, but he's done so much good for us that we need him and we love him and we're grateful. And who among us isn't fallen? Trump himself, he's Jesus. You know, the other day at one of his speeches, he said, if I opened my shirt, you would see my wounds.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know that
wounds all over my body.
Now, I doubt very much that Trump has any religious feelings. We do know, and I mentioned this in my book, that his parents went to Norman Vincent Peale's church on Fifth Avenue. Norman Vincent Peale married Trump and Ivana. And Trump talked about how wonderful it was listening to his sermons, because he didn't get into a lot of religious crap. He was mostly about succeeding. And it's funny, you kind of trace the anti-Catholicism that I was talking about. The biggest leader of the anti-Kennedy movement among the Protestant leaders that were trying to stop him, the spokesman for the group was Norman Vincent Peale. Now, I mean, again, it's a funny thing. I don't think Trump thinks that way. But what he did take in was that Norman Vincent Peale had a shtick, and he leaned on it, and he got a bestseller out of it, and he got a lot of influence out of it.
Right. We have an interesting question here from one of our IMers, number 13, writes in saying, is there a way to channel the desire for absolution within conspiracy into something egalitarian? Basically, can you confront this in a way that can be more egalitarian, or is your view a bit more pessimistic than our viewer suggests?
I don't know I don't know that this is a thing that you can leverage for good.
Right.
You know, it's like, I started to say earlier, when I started writing these books, I thought we had a problem with critical thinking in America. I thought we had a problem with education. I still do, but what I've come to see is that what we really have is a problem with hate. We have this foundational problem of hate and fear. I think that's part of being a human being. And, you know, you create organizations and political systems and so on, as the authors of the Federalist Papers wrote over and over again, to try to account for human flaws and human foibles and to control them. I think bad guys leverage those things. Good guys are kind of stuck. Or, on the other hand, you know, we're hanging in the balance, but everybody's not on the other side. And it's like if you write something on the internet and you get 20 really nasty comments, that does not necessarily reflect everybody that read your piece.
Right.
It reflects the people that hated your piece. And the people that liked it may not say anything. And I kind of think that we're going to find out that there's a ceiling for Trumpism. And he has the crazies, and he has the billionaires. And he has the very, very fascist people that think that they can use him. He has the Christian nationalists, the people that want to restore a Christian polity. He has all these people. He's not going to win unless he can add a lot more people on top of that. And I am somewhat hopeful that those people are gettable, and that rather than trying to pry away the committed Trump people, the anti-Trump people need to work on the people that are in the middle. I have a lot of respect right now for the former Republicans that are anti-Trump. I also have a lot of worries about them because they are looking to take over the Democratic Party. They're looking for a new home.
Oh, yeah.
And I understand that.
Right. Yes, I share those concerns as well. Just to bring it back to some other questions I had before we let you go, Arthur. How do you talk about how we have a hate problem? These conspiracy theories, they take those similar shapes that you describe about groups of people, shadowy figures. Maybe they're pedophiles drinking people's blood and children under a pizza parlor or something like that. But it's always a means to another end. And these groups are, their relationship with Black people, with Latina people, with the people that a lot of these folks are scared of, is one that I'm curious, through your research, how does racism play into it? Because a lot of these folks have very low opinions of Black people, of Latino people, all of that. So that they make it so that they're not the ones that are orchestrating this grand plan. It's the shadowy folks behind the scenes who are doing that. How do you trace that back historically?
Well, if you're a white supremacist, then you can't say that, that you're being beaten back by Black people, because you're superior to them. You're smarter than them. So it must be a traitor in your own group that's doing it. It must be a fifth column. And that's the formula. I mean, the other thing that has happened in American history, and it's been harder with Blacks because they were slaves. They were brought here in chains and had no rights officially for a long time. Other groups have been allowed to become white, become American. It takes a couple generations. If you learn how to use the slang, if you learn how to dress, if you get into the right businesses, you can mix. Right now, I think the highest quality immigrant group in terms of like education and money and so on, I think it might be Nigerians right now. And it's very likely that as time goes on, they're going to start slicing and dicing. The Blackness won't be a monolithic thing anymore. There will be enough Black conservatives and rich Black conservatives and African conservatives and so on, Catholic African conservatives that are active over here, that they'll have to find a new group. But right now, they're very identifiable. I don't know what they're going to do about Hispanic people or Latin people. They hate them, but they also need them, and they're getting a lot of them. Second generation Latin people are starting to trend Republican because they have some money. But again, Trump's wildness is creating real problems for them. He's anti-business, so he's losing the Fortune 500 CEO class. He has, blue-collar entrepreneurs. He has the billionaire class, but the people that run companies that have 1 million employees are not crazy about him. They're scared. They need stability. They need predictability. So, I mean, I think that there's like a natural limit to some of these things. You can start destroying yourself. Right? Like this isn't as good an example, but don't vote by mail. Except now they want you to vote by mail because they need those votes.
Right. Exactly. Well, really fascinating stuff. The book is called The Politics of Fear, The Peculiar Persistence of American Paranoia. There was a lot of talk about how J.D. Vance, his book, Hillbilly Elegy, was the way to understand the Trump voter and really get into the minds of why someone may have voted for Trump in 2016. I'm going to get your book for people who said that in my family and say, no, this is how you understand the Trump voter, and read it like this, okay? So it's not this romanticized notion, and J.D. Vance will probably be his VP, by the way. So thanks, Arthur, for your time. I really appreciate it. We'll put your and of course we'll put your book in the description, link to it wherever people are listening to or watching this. Thanks so much.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.